Hello and welcome to Faith in Action, a Christian Institute podcast. If you do like this podcast, then do subscribe and share it with others. And if you like our content generally, then do sign up to the CI at the.ci/sign up, and you'll get a whole host of resources from us. But today I'm joined again by our director, Ciarán Kelly. Ciarán, it seems like we can hardly keep you away. I wasn't intending to use you quite as often, but I think it's been 3 times in 6 episodes now, so maybe I need to start casting the net a bit further.
Good idea.
But yeah, it's nice to have you on anyway.
Thank you.
You're a very useful person to have.
Oh, excellent. Oh, you say the sweetest things.
Yeah. So there are, of course, 2 kind of major campaign updates that we will come to in a bit. Assisted suicide, a lot going on there. Conversion therapy or conversion practices ban that we need to talk about as well. But firstly, I think we should really talk about some of the things which have been in the news. The first of which really, I think, ought to be the murder of Anne Widdecombe.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to know what to say, really. It's such a shock. It's so sad. We have worked with Anne off and on over, well, I don't know how many, probably more than 20 years. Probably closer to 30 years, actually, thinking about it. And she's always been on the right side of the issues consistently. And I think whether people have loved her or have, I don't think it's too strong a word to say, hated her, and certainly been very opposed to some of her views. For most people, this awful incident has caused them to realise that she was a woman who spoke her mind, but did so with compassion, did so with grace, wouldn't compromise, but was someone who just spoke well and thought well of others, including those who were very, very opposed to it. Now, that's not been universally the case, and I don't think we should give the kind of people who have been engaging in the vitriol against her with the oxygen of publicity. But obviously, for a lot of people, there's just been a recognition that she was a brave woman who wouldn't compromise. She spoke out on the reality of marriage, or the significance of marriage as being between one man and one woman to the exclusion of all others, and for life. She spoke very clearly on behalf of the Coalition for Marriage campaign back in the early 2010s, when the country was sadly moving towards adopting same-sex marriage and redefining marriage. She's spoken out against calls to liberalise illegal drugs and decriminalise drugs. She has been on the right side of the assisted suicide argument. She's spoken up for Christian freedom. She was very supportive of Peter and Hazel Mary Bull when they were going through their case. So yeah, she is a miss. She was a unique personality. She had great wit. I remember I only spoke to her once, actually. It was on the phone, and it was about someone that we were giving legal support to, and I felt like I was being grilled. She was very clear on the issue. She had an incredible grasp of detail, and it felt a little bit like she was testing me as to whether I was all over the detail as she was. I think I passed that test. I felt like I did, but I hadn't been here very long at the stage, and that was certainly a little bit of a baptism of fire. So she will be much missed by the Christian Institute.
There is Amnesty International's new report, A Growing Threat to the Anti-Rights Movement in the UK, and I have a copy of it here. It's been withdrawn now.
Yeah.
But I have it here, and well, do you want to explain why I'm highlighting it?
Well, we are on there. In fact, we are named in their executive summary. So I don't quite know what reason we owe that honour, but I think it's because there are a number of areas which Amnesty International does not like. and it's people who stand up for the rights of the unborn, people who stand up for women who are exploited by prostitution, women generally, in the sense of people who uphold biological reality and would deny that trans women are women, that we uphold free speech, religious liberty. So we tick a number of boxes for issues that Amnesty International, it would appear, sadly, doesn't like. And let's remind ourselves that Amnesty International started in, I think it was 1961, it was started by a Roman Catholic, someone who was so concerned at examples of prisoners of conscience, people of faith or political conscience who were being arrested and put into prison, started Amnesty International. So they had good reasons for starting, and they operated within those lines for a long, long time. But they seem to have just shifted their attention in recent years, and do seem to have a particular issue with Christian organisations, because organisations like us do stand up for the rights of the unborn, and Amnesty pretty much think that abortion should be a human right. We do stand up for biological reality, and they have added in this report this year a whole host of what you would call gender critical or biological realist organisations, which I think is partly why it's attracted so much adverse publicity, because they produced a not too dissimilar report last year, and which focused pretty much on religious liberty organisations or Christian organisations, didn't garner quite so much opposition. So, I mean, if it didn't have the Amnesty name on it, you would really sort of, you couldn't take it seriously. But because Amnesty International has such a big global presence and has historically had such significance, that's what makes it a problem. I can't say I'm sorry to be on there. Obviously, we are not an anti-rights organisation, despite how they've chosen to position us. I'm glad they've withdrawn it. It's pretty shoddy work, to be honest. I think they're probably very embarrassed. I think it is going to have damaged them. And I've seen, I know social media isn't everything, but you get a sense of people saying, I'm withdrawing my support from Amnesty because of what they've done. So,
I mean, that's what they were calling for people to do, really. You know, that they
call on the Charity Commission to investigate people. Not everybody who's on there is a charity, but to investigate removal of charity status. They call on institutional donors and grant makers to reconsider funding. Now, we're supported by nearly 65,000 people, 5,500 churches. It's my strong belief that they are not going to be deterred by, I mean, this kind of schoolboy sort of report. They understand our work. They understand that we are standing up for human rights. Amnesty International have as their sort of strapline is standing up for all the human rights of all. I think there's words to that effect. I think this shows that in reality they're not. They operating a pick and mix policy where they're standing up for the rights of some, not for all.
Well, I mean, yes, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I've got I printed out a copy of the European Convention on Human Rights, and I'm certainly no expert on it, but
well, we have experts here. We could get them in.
But Article 2 is the right to life.
Yeah.
You know, people have a right to life that should be protected, and you know, everyone's right to life should be protected by law. No one should be deprived of his life intentionally, save in the execution of a sentence of a court following a conviction of a crime. And then there are three exceptions, which essentially are self-defense, lawful arrest, or in quelling a riot or insurrection. It doesn't say or for abortion. Mm-hmm. And that is what Amnesty seem to spend a lot of their time making sure that people have so-called reproductive rights, which is, well, reproductive rights. You know, if you want to argue that everyone should be able to have a child, you could call those reproductive rights, but actually ending the life of a child, that's not a reproductive right.
Yeah, they don't believe. Seemingly, they just don't believe that unborn human beings are in fact human beings. That is the Amnesty problem. They're not unique in that. I mean, that is the basic premise of most people who would call themselves pro-choice, is that they fundamentally don't believe in the human rights of the unborn human child, or certainly at least not below a certain number of weeks. So it's a tragedy. Similarly, they would hold themselves out as defending women's rights, whilst simultaneously denying the biological reality of what it means to be an adult human female. They would talk about the empowerment of women, but then rebrand prostitution as empowerment. Whereas we know that prostitution is a means to degrade and exploit and often traffic women. It's hugely degrading to their God-given image.
Setting that aside, we have the more news that has broken about the PSNI, the Police Service of Northern Ireland, who there was a question asked of them, and they came back with their answer. And the question was, if I'm a chaplain in a hospital, because you've got these safe access zones where you can't talk about abortion, but then of course because of the Clive case and Clive Johnston's conviction for preaching the gospel in a safe access zone, abortion censorship zone, can I be in a hospital wearing my minister's robes and clerical garb and carrying a Bible? Can I pray with someone? And the PSNI have basically come back and said, well, some of these things might be.
Yeah. So I mean, this shows the importance of Pastor Clive Johnston case. It shows, hopefully, it makes plain to everybody why we are defending him, why we think it's so significant, why we're helping him with his appeal. So very briefly, Clive Johnston was preaching the gospel, preaching from John 3:16 in one of these censorship zones, or as they're called, safe access zones. And we would argue, and did argue, that preaching the gospel is not covered by the law on safe access zones. And at the magistrate's court, we lost that argument, and we will be appealing, or Clive will be appealing with our help. Now, that prompted questions, I think understandably, from people who are engaged in hospital chaplaincy. One was raised quite quickly afterwards, and I don't know whether it was the same person raised this at a police board event. I think it was. So the question was raised by the Northern Ireland Policing Board to the Chief Constable. They have this forum of asking questions, they're putting questions to the Chief Constable, and then the Chief Constable themselves or someone on behalf of them answers the question. So to be fair to the PSNI, what they have said is how people have been trying to interpret the law, which is to say that if you're reckless, if you're carrying a Bible recklessly, I'm not quite sure how you can do that. I haven't got the wording of the law in front of me, but it's if you're influencing somebody, a protected person, in this case, someone who's seeking an abortion or someone who works on it, then you could fall foul of the law. So this highlights that the problem isn't really the problem is the law. The problem is the law.
It's written just too broadly.
It's written in such a broad fashion. It should not be a question of. It shouldn't be up for question about praying with somebody in a hospital. You shouldn't have to. A hospital chaplain or someone doing hospital visits should not have to think, if can I pray in this place but not in this place? If it's on a corridor, it's a problem. If it's in a private room, the door shut, then that's not a problem. I can read this piece of scripture, but not that piece of scripture. I can hold my Bible under my arm, or do I have to put it away? These are ludicrous things to be even talking about, and the PSNI has tried to sort of say, well, basically you should be fine, but there's some circumstances where it might be a problem. That just shouldn't be an area of discussion. The law is badly worded, and we said that this is why there was a prosecution of Clive in the first place. Is that the law was not intended, and when it was being put through, we were given all sorts of assurances around religious liberty and religious freedom. The law was supposed to deal with, or it was based upon the allegations that there were hordes of people protesting outside abortion centres and harassing women and the likes. Now, the evidence base, even for those claims, was incredibly weak. But even if you take those at face value, what it wasn't there to do was to criminalise somebody praying inside the bounds of a hospital or reading the scripture to them. So if you can just imagine the situation where somebody is going to visit an obs and gynae ward, perhaps there's a couple who have just lost a child, and just the awfulness of that, and they want their minister to pray with them. They want some comfort from Scripture. And I mean, I don't know the layout of every hospital in Northern Ireland. I imagine that the abortion services, quote unquote, won't be too far away from perhaps from maternity facilities or obs and gynae facilities. So no church minister or hospital chaplain should have to think, am I okay to do this with this couple? Because somebody might be nearby, or a hospital worker might be nearby, who thinks I'm trying to persuade them, or perceives themselves to be persuaded, or reads it in that way. The threshold is so weak, the law is so vague. So the problem really is with the law and how it's worded, and it needs to be. We need to have clarity that these things do not and should not fall into the scope of the criminal law.
Well, let's move on and talk about some of our campaigns at the moment. So why don't we start by looking at conversion therapy, conversion practices ban, which, 8 years after it was threatened by the previous Conservative government.
July the 3rd, 2018 is when it was announced. Penny Mordaunt announced this policy under Theresa May's government that trans women are women, that was in her speech, and that conversion therapy, I think they were still calling it then, was abusive, and there needed to be a law against it. Yeah.
And so now, 8 years later, finally, it's been a draft bill has been talked about, has been tabled, and what's going to be the impact on Christians? Because over these last 8 years, there's been lots of talk about it'll include this, it won't include this, it could include this, it should include this. Mm-hmm. A lot of what the CI have been talking about and what we've been concerned about is it going to impact ordinary church activity? Is it going to impact someone preaching from the pulpit? Is it going to impact people praying with somebody who is same-sex attracted? Is it going to impact people having those kind of pastoral conversations? Is it going to impact parenting? Because if you've got a child who says, I feel like I might be transgender, I think maybe I'm non-binary, or I want to go to Tavistock. Well, no, there is no Tavistock anymore, but yeah, and if you're a parent, you say, no, God made you the way that you are. Don't worry, these feelings are going to pass. That all of these things might get caught up in it somehow. So what does this draft bill look like?
Well, there was a number of things in there. So let's start with that crucial word that you used a couple of times quite rightly, which was draft. It's a draft bill. That means it's going to get an extra layer of scrutiny by way of a joint parliamentary committee. 6 MPs, 6 peers will put it through a level of scrutiny before it gets presented to the House of Commons. at the time of recording, there hasn't been a chair announced. We don't know what the makeup of that committee is going to be. So the first thing that people should do is to pray that that's a fair, well-balanced committee. We saw what happened with the assisted suicide committee and how imbalanced these things can be. So let's pray.
With the Leadbeater bill.
With the Leadbeater bill, quite right. So that's the first thing. That it's a draft bill. There'll be a public consultation, and when we know the dates for that, we'll be in touch with people and giving them, helping them to understand the bill and what's at stake, and what they can do in terms of contacting parliamentarians to get their views across. It's really, really important that they do that. So in terms of the scope, I mean, it's every bit as bad as we had feared, every bit as bad as had been talked about. It's what's called a trans-inclusive ban.
Well, that's one of the things that they were talking about, in previous iterations. Should it be a trans-inclusive ban? Should it not be?
Yeah.
But they've kept it in.
They've kept it in, yeah. I mean, I think we talked about the fact it's taken 8 years. I think this is the fact it's taken that long to get to this point tells you that there are real problems with the whole area. This was not the first time that lawyers will have looked at this bill, and we know pretty well that lawyers have looked at this before and said that this is likely to contravene Article 8, Article 9, Article 10, maybe Article 11 of people's convention rights, and so there's real problems here. We've done any number of legal opinions which have made that clear as well. I think we have to imagine that government lawyers have looked at this. So you've got to kind of question, why are they doing this in the face of all the legal reality of the problems of this? I'm not going to speculate about that, but what is on the bill itself is really troubling, and the areas that we feared would be court, preaching, prayer, pastoral care, parents' conversations with their children, all are potentially within the scope of. We've used the vague word before. This kind of vague, it's really badly drafted. Definitions are unclear. Definitions are incomplete. There's non-exhaustive lists trying to describe any activities which fall into certain categories, but we'll give you a set of a list, but it's not everything. It talks about the threshold being abuse, but then defines that in relation to emotional pressure and financial pressure or economic pressure. It's the language it uses.
What does that kind of boil down to?
Well, let's take a scenario. So, a mother has a daughter who is been on an online, one of these online transgender chat rooms, has been persuaded by that, or perhaps by stuff that she's been taught at school, that because she likes football and prefers jeans to dresses, that in fact she is a boy trapped in a girl's body, and wants to have a chest binder, wants to go on puberty blockers. So not an unrealistic scenario. Mm. And the mother...
Both of those things can be quite harmful, hazardous to health.
Oh, absolutely hazardous to health. Yes, we know that's really, really clear. Very damaging to growing bodies. And let's imagine the mother says, "Darling, listen, I know things are difficult at the moment, but we're not going to buy you a chest binder. We're certainly not going to enable you to get hold of puberty blockers because you're a girl, and you will realise this, and we can work through this." So imagine this teenage girl has been told that she's not trans, so she's not a boy trapped in a girl's body. She's in fact just a girl having some difficulties with her actual body. That she won't be bought a chest binder, which is damaging to her breast development, and we won't pay for or facilitate puberty blockers. So you've got perhaps emotional stress in there. I mean, this is teenagers. and without being too cliched, we know what teenagers can be like, and everything can seem terrible. And I mean, this operates in an environment where people say, your words are literally killing me. It's a very emotive environment. You have the closeness of a mother-daughter relationship. We're not going to spend money on you. So you see how emotional pressure could be deemed to come into play. You could see how economic pressure, we're not going to spend money, could be deemed to come into play. And then this threshold of causing serious alarm or distress that causes that impacts day-to-day behaviour. Well, if someone's whole identity is caught up in this idea that they are the opposite sex, you can see how that threshold would easily be met. So take the minister who is wants to pray with a man who comes to talk to him about the idea of leaving his wife for a man, and is counselled not to do that because Christian teaching, whether you're leaving your divorcing for leaving your spouse for a man or for a woman, because that's something that the scripture would teach against. So you can see that these ordinary conversation, ordinary church activity, ordinary conversations between parents and children, and not just Christian parents. I know that was your example, but this isn't a religious issue. This is an everybody issue in terms of normal conversations where someone could regard it as being you're trying to persuade someone to change their sexual orientation or their gender. So it's really problematic. Now, lots of people have spoken out against it. There's a lot of women's groups who are very concerned about the trans issue. Obviously, we're concerned about the LGB as well as the T, because Christian teaching talks about sexual morality and what that means, how homosexuality fits into that. So, but we're not on our own in terms of pushing back against it. But it is a real problem. We're taking legal advice on the finer points of what the black and white text of the draft law says, and we'll have that available in good time. Yeah,
Christians are obviously going to be concerned about it, I think, and rightly so. But the government is going to have a hard time trying to, if they're determined, they're going to have a very hard time pushing this through. I mean, we've produced publications about other jurisdictions that have tried to bring forward conversion therapy or conversion practices ban and have found it incredibly difficult to do so. Is it likely to be difficult to do so here as well?
Well, the Labour government has a huge majority. It was a manifesto issue, and it could. We shouldn't kid ourselves. I mean, it could pass, and where that leaves you then is the inevitability of it is that a case is going to end up arising where, because of this such a terrible law, that there is a court action on behalf of someone who is caught up in it who ought not to be. So the mother whose child outs them as being transphobic and says that they wouldn't purchase a chest binder and wouldn't purchase puberty blockers. And by doing so, they're engaged in conversion practices. Police investigation can ensue. And let's bear in mind, you see, that cases won't necessarily get to the point of being in court. They might do, but they won't necessarily get to the point of being in court. But you have the upheaval in someone's life of the police knocking on the door, the accusations that they've been engaged in criminal activity, i.e. conversion practices. I mean, it's just dreadful. And that could be happening all over the country, because we know that people are increasingly waking up to the dangers of transgender ideology. It's becoming less of a niche view. I mean, we were pushing back against it back in 2003, 2004, when the Gender Recognition Act was going through. It's much more common to hold the views that we do now about the reality of biological sex. But you can still see the situation where there are parents and church ministers who are caught up in this. And before you even get to the stage of police investigations, you have the whole chilling effect of people being unwilling to challenge gender ideology or advocate for Christian sexual ethics because of this fear that if they speak the truth, they're going to fall foul of the law. So this is really, really problematic. The government claims that it's fixing loopholes. It's really difficult to see the reality of those loopholes, and even what they've been talked about in terms of domestic abuse law. You don't need such a wide-ranging law to deal with, if they exist at all, quite niche areas of the law. So, unfortunately, the government has responded to pressure from trans activists. I think it's quite telling that Stonewall were on the press release that the government put out, and we know that there's been many years where support for Stonewall has fallen off. There's been recognition that they have advocated for transgender ideology over and against the rights of women in particular, who are so affected by men being in single-sex spaces. So we should be very wary of any law which has got a sort of a Stonewall seal of approval on it. And no doubt there will be people who will be arguing that the law doesn't go far enough. Now, quite how much further it could go is difficult to see. Let's also just remind ourselves of the protection orders that are in there. So the idea that a breach of the law might happen is enough to get a protection order put in place. And you can see how perhaps in the environment where social workers are involved with a family, and that family is unwilling to affirm their child in their transgender thinking, that social workers could put one of these protection orders in place. I mean, it's just dreadful from start to finish. Shambolically worded, vast in its reach. It's law that is delving into, there's encroaching on churches and encroaching on home life. I mean, it's truly appalling, and will come up against legal challenge. I think of that, I could have no question. But at what point do we have to wait for it to come onto the books for those challenges to happen? We pray it never gets that far.
And then assisted suicide.
Yes,
this new, well, not really a new bill.
No.
Lauren Edwards is essentially bringing back Kim Leadbeater's bill,
yes,
flawed as it was.
Yes,
and the reason it didn't get passed was because it was so flawed.
Yes,
that it had to spend months and months and months in the House of Lords.
Yeah,
but she's bringing it back, and she just wants to do away.
Yeah.
With the House of Lords process.
Yeah, so there was this whole narrative that there was basically this good bill, and a few peers in the House of Lords tabled masses of amendments deliberately to hold it up and to use up the time and filibuster, and had these hours and hours of speeches. I mean, it's all untrue. There were over 1,200 amendments tabled, and there were a smallish number of peers who did a lot of those, but that's because the people that understand things like palliative care best would table those amendments. They might not have generated them, but that's how the process works. So the palliative care expert would bundle together any of, I don't know how many amendments there were to do with palliative care, but would bundle them together. They would put their name associated with those. Someone who was a disability expert, someone like Baroness Tanny Gray Thompson, would tend to table the ones connected to that. But there was well over 100, I think something like 140 peers tabled amendments. The average speech length was something like 5 minutes, not the hours that the likes of Dignity and Dying would claim. The main proponent of the bill in the House of Lords, Lord Falconer, Charlie Falconer, tabled something like 70. Don't quote me on the figures, but tabled something like 70 himself. So this idea that this small number of peers is for the birds, really. I mean, it just has no root in reality, but it's a good tactic, and it's a tactic that they've been trying to use and trying to get people to buy into, which enables them to come back and say, well, this bill that we had was all ready and there was nothing wrong with it. If it hadn't been for those pesky Lords, what we need to do is take them out of the process, and the way to do that is to use the Parliament Acts, and you table the same bill, and then it can the process is much curtailed, and essentially it's holding a gun to the head of the Lords that you either pass it amendments that we can live with, or we can agree, or the unamended version goes through. Now, as I just said, Charlie Faulkner tabled round about 70 amendments himself. So there's a recognition that what went to the House of Lords in the first place needed improving. Let's say, if you want to be really generous about it, needed improving, even if you don't take the view as I would, that it was just a mess from start to finish. You needed improving, but those would be lost as well. So you'd have an even worse bill, and that's the threat. Really, is set your conscience aside and what your duty aside, and do what we want. Otherwise, you'll get something that's even worse. It's not really the way to do politics, I don't think. And they can talk about how a democracy should work. That is not how a democracy should work. Recently, or just this week, they were saying we'll come back again and again. So it's a case of give us what we want this time, or we'll just keep coming back again and again. Well, I mean, there's been rejected, I don't know, is it 12 times, 15 times in various versions of an assisted suicide bill in the UK in the last sort of 10 years or so. Again, don't quote me on the numbers. So we know that they'll come back anyway. These people are zealots for the end of life. They lack compassion. They degrade humanity into a way which makes it about the finance, the cost of keeping people alive. It's no way to deal with the law at all. It's no way to treat human beings. So the September 11th is the second reading. Really, really crucial vote that can put the whole thing. It can kill the bill. We can kill the bill at second reading. So it's really important that people engage with the process. I know it's been going on for a long, long time. Conversion therapy 8 years, assisted suicide for a couple of years. It's easy for people to get weary. I mean, I recognise that, but it's so important that people remain engaged. They remain they're prepared to write, even if they've written already, to write again to MPs, in particular ahead of the second reading, to ensure that that this bill does not make it onto the statute book. It's so important.
So you said there that September 11th that we can kill the bill. I mean, how realistic does that seem? It was reasonably close at the last vote in Commons. There was about 20-23. Do you think, as I do, that because they're talking about skipping out all the amendments process, last time the MPs voted on it, they looked at it and quite a few of them said, pass it now, send it through to the Lords, they'll fix it for us. What we're now having is a situation where they might just exclude the Lords entirely. Our MP is going to be a bit more fearful and therefore say, actually, if it's this or nothing, we'd rather have nothing. And so let's just not pass it.
Yeah, some will. Some will, certainly. I think that is absolutely right. I fear that some will have drunk the Kool-Aid of that the House of Lords have operated in some anti-democratic fashion in it running out of time. I mean, as you say there were MPs who said, because it was a very rushed process in the Commons, because let's not forget, it was a private member's bill. It's still a private member's bill. It doesn't get the level of time, the amount of time and the level of scrutiny that a government bill would do. So it was rushed through the Commons, it was rushed through committee. And there were people who said, well, We don't know all the ins and outs of it. It's pretty complex. The House of Lords gets much more time to debate these issues than the House of Commons does. We know they'll scrutinise it. We'll let them scrutinise it. And then the House of Lords they're being accused of holding up the process for doing the job which the House of Commons, or some in the House of Commons, said we want you to do. And actually, at the start of the debate, Charlie Faulkner was speaking about how wonderful it was that the Lords could do a job of scrutiny until they did the job, and he didn't like the job that they'd done. I mean, that is what happened. There might be a certain amount of an attempt to rewrite history now, but that is what happened. So there will be some who fall into that, but I do will go for the kind of, if it's all or nothing, then we'll go for nothing. I do fear that there are some who have just bought into this narrative, and so they would take the opposite view, or they may take the opposite view of saying, because the Lords held it up, then the Commons has primacy. That's quite right. That's how our Constitution works. And so if we need to push it through, we'll push it through. So I don't think we can make too many assumptions. I do think it is winnable. I do think it's a winnable argument, but we can't take anything for granted. I sense a little bit of from some people that there's an unwillingness to kind of go through this process again, even if it's curtailed. That there is a discomfort about using the Parliament Acts, which have never been used. They've only been used about 7 times, I think, and never on a private member's bill. So that I think there's some reluctance to use this process as a sledgehammer to get their way. That they recognise that isn't really how democracy works. But we can't assume any of this. Now, we were working to understand MPs' positions. We'll be in touch with people as is appropriate at the best times. It's going into summer now. People will be. There's a temptation to sort of switch off. We can't really afford to switch off over these next weeks because the second reading debate comes so soon into September. Schools will barely be back, so people need to be engaged with it over the summer. It's really, really important.
And we've already had a couple of questions on these issues, so let's go straight to the Q&A now. Okay.
There's always a sense of trepidation when it goes into the Q&A. Don't know what's going to come. I genuinely don't know what's going to come.
So someone has asked, providing high-quality palliative care is the obvious solution to the problem that assisted dying or assisted suicide is trying to resolve. Would it be a good idea for an MP to introduce a private member's bill proposing legislation and a budget to bring that about?
Well, there is one, actually. Paul Foster has a bill on palliative care. I think there was one in the last session as well. It's probably very similar to that. But that's something like 19th on the list of private members' bills. So it's not really going to get any kind of hearing. What is interesting is that Andy Burnham has said, I think, that whilst he supports the principle of assisted suicide, and sadly so many do, he doesn't think it should be brought in until palliative care is dealt with. So
because it's all about choice. Lots of people say, people should be able to choose how they die, but then there's, on the other hand, well, actually, if there's no decent palliative care, there's no choice.
Well, yes, but even if, but I mean, this idea of choice is it's like this idea that is king, and that autonomy is king, and unfortunately that there are people who are put in a position where even if the world around them is not telling them that they should feel like a burden, they feel like they're a burden because they're thinking about their children, or they're thinking about their grandchildren, they're thinking about the cost of the NHS. I mean, it's really interesting that just pretty recently, Dawn French, who was until recently all for assisted suicide, I think it's fair to say, it suddenly dawned on her that people who are perhaps most vulnerable economically, who are less well off and what have you, had the most to fear from this because of this sense of being a financial burden. So this choice is an illusion anyway. I mean, certainly the absence of palliative care is more likely to encourage people to feel that they should get help to end their own lives. We spoke with a palliative care doctor who said in his 25 years he's never known of a situation where people couldn't be made to feel better, whose death couldn't be eased, their pain and discomfort couldn't be eased through good palliative care. So it's really important it's made more widely available. And interestingly, he said that sense of people dying in terrible pain that is so often the narrative that is connected to this, he said often that is read into their situation by, understandably, by loved ones, by family members who infer a level of pain that person, or discomfort or quality of life that person isn't feeling themselves because they remember how they used to be. But if you're in that situation, his experience, this one palliative care doctor, his experience is that people adjust and they don't want help they want help to live. They don't want help to die.
And then our other question is, we've sort of covered it a bit already, but are churches going to have to stop preaching on certain Bible passages if the conversion therapy ban goes through?
Well, we must praise and get to that point, and I think it would be most churches, most faithful Bible-believing churches will continue to preach the whole counsel of God, so we must make absolutely sure that they're not put in a position where they have to decide between remaining faithful to God's word and criminalisation.
Well, thank you very much, Ciarán. We've covered an awful lot today, and I think all of it was very helpful for our supporters as well. If you found it helpful, if you'd like to have more of this content, remember you can subscribe, you can join us at the.ci/sign up. Again, if you have any questions, email them in to faithinaction@christian.org.uk. Thanks for listening. Bye. For more great content, like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell.